Hey guys, I'm Dr. Sebastian Dulce. I'm going to cover Piriformis Syndrome for you today and the reasons why. It's just continuing in your case. Now, the problem with Piriformis Syndrome is actually that a lot of times it's misdiagnosed. And although the pain is in the area of the piriformis muscle and it really does feel like the piriformis is tight and achy and throbbing and so on, and stretching it seems to reduce symptoms very quickly, but it tends to come back. The reason why these things tend to continue is because you're not figuring out what's driving the bus, okay? Just like in the Simpsons analogy, you have Maggie and Marge in the opener driving, okay? If you don't stop the person who's actually turning the car is going to continue in the same direction. So this is the same thing. There's multiple things that can be creating a sensation of tightness in this piriformis. And by the way, if it tends to increase with bending forward or getting out of a car or putting shoes on or sitting for a long period of time, a lot of times the driver is not the muscle itself, it's something higher. Now the areas that we're going to be looking at here is, if you see in the spine here, there's this little red area which is a disc injury of some type, and there are varying different types, but also there's this nerve passing by as well. And as you can see, if this nerve is being pressurized by a disc herniation or maybe even something like a narrowing of a little hole like stenosis, sometimes those can be driving the condition. And honestly, if I'd estimate, probably 75% of the time, easily, these conditions of the tightness you feel, the reason why they continue is because you're not addressing the main driver of the condition. Now, as I go through this exercise progression today, I'm going to show you some of the exams that we use here at Performance Place to really figure out what's driving the bus. And I really attempt to, when I work with people on this, I try to show them beyond any doubt that their condition is not the muscle itself. Things that you can do, which we won't do in this exam, is you can stress test a region. You can really force this muscle into in an elongated pattern and really put resistance on it. And if it doesn't trigger a response, it's probably not it. Could you have scar tissue and adhesions and so on in there? Yeah, probably, maybe, but a lot of times they're not symptomatic, they're not pain generators. So just as the piriformis overall, just from a movement standpoint, it moves when the hip moves, okay? It's attached to the pelvis or the sacrum on the front side, and it goes down and attaches to the hip. So it will tend to move around when you move the hip forward and bring the knee forward, and also turn this way and that way at the hip as well. So as we go through this today, the challenge that I give to you is to figure out what logically doesn't make sense with this, if this is a muscle problem. If it logically doesn't make sense, then it's probably not a muscle problem. And a lot of times when you address this with a movement-based correction and you offload that driver, you'll be A-okay, and this will be like you never even had it before. Let's go into that exam. Okay, so one of the simplest things you can use to really rule out if this is a piriformis issue truly or not is figure out if your spine has a correlating factor with it. Now, usually I take people through a movement assessment and I say, like, what tends to bother your condition? And they might say, well, you know, one thing that really bothers it is they bend down like this when my piriformis really gets tight, right? Or they might say, like, hitting a golf ball, just going through the basic movement will make their piriformis feel tight. So what we typically do is see if we can reverse that position of being rounded slightly and just see if that reduces the symptoms. Now, I think we're all in agreement that this position right here of being extended at the back or arching at the back is not a piriformis stretch. And actually what I want this area and below basically to be paralyzed and not helping that at all. So I just have them hang in this position for about like 20, 30 seconds. Sometimes people say, well, there's a little bit of tightness here in the back. By the way, if you have tightness in your back and correlated with a piriformis tightness, it's probably not your piriformis. It's the back is probably the driver. Now, if they sit here long enough, a lot of times people will start to melt and they'll get into a 0 out of 10 pain and they'll start saying, yeah, it feels pretty darn good. I wish I felt like this all the time. If we challenge this range a little bit more and you go through small oscillations, sometimes you'll find that, again, it starts to trigger a little bit. It starts to become a little bit more irritated right along the back or in the piriformis. The magic's in the numbers here. If you start finding that extension tends to improve it, and they eventually get up to here and they're like, yep, 0 out of 10 pain. And then you stand them up and you get them to go through the movement again and they're like, hey, that feels really good. Hey, it doesn't hurt anymore. That's a really simple way of figuring out if a disc injury is actually driving the condition with the piriformis. And I'd say that's a strong majority of the time. Now, to remedy this, you really don't need to go through a bunch of manual therapy or tissue work or adjustments all the time. They're needed in some cases, but a lot of times it's as simple as doing something like this and getting them to stop picking their scab. Now, people with Piriformis syndrome, again, with self-diagnosed Piriformis syndrome, they'll do stuff like this. They'll do their Piriformis stretch. When if you look at my spine here, I'm rounding it, okay? And they're like, yeah, that's the stretch, right? So it's not a stretch they're feeling, it's the muscle trying to protect the disc from being torn apart, basically, in a slang term, okay? So anytime this spine rounds for them, in this period of time in their life, their piriformis or their hamstring or their back is going to tighten up a little bit as a protective response. Now, think about that. It's a protective response, all right? It's trying to get you to not do it. So when you keep doing it, or you keep doing it, it's going to continue, okay? All we got to do is just treat this as it is, okay? The pain is a self-feeding fire. So we just start throwing a bunch of sand on it every once in a while. So a lot of times we find that you take people through this progression, they're like, hey, that got better again, right? If this is working all the time, we give it to them frequently throughout the day. And then we eventually build their program with a little bit of core strengthening, some hip strengthening, and all of a sudden their stuff goes away and they just have a normal life, okay? So if you have questions about Piriformis syndrome, think about the mechanics of it, okay? If extension of the spine takes it away, you're not stretching the piriformis. If a piriformis stretch takes it away only for a couple minutes at a time, no matter the piriformis stretch, if it takes it away for a couple minutes or even an hour at a time, but yet it returns, you have to consider if you're really doing the best thing long term. Because I know this style works for people in office. In addition, if you understand the mechanics of your problem, and if bending forward or sitting for a long time, or sitting in a chair for a long time, or driving, or exiting a car, if they tend to trigger your symptoms, what's the common denominator here, right? And if you put it like a little back brace there, you start to go into extension or go on walks and it feels better, again, you're just reversing that rounded moment of the spine that you have. So that's how we remedy a lot of stuff here at Performance Place with this type of thing. If you have any questions on this video, comments, criticism, just put it below. I have no problem answering questions on this. There's a very good success rate on it. If you're in Huntington Beach, California, come visit me. It's when you start to build into a program like this, later on it should start to look like a strength and conditioning program, which is going to set you free and can do things on your own. I will put a link to a little guide that I put together as well. I'll put it in the corner over here. I get people to ask questions via email about these types of conditions, and I'd love to answer as much as I can. However, I want everyone to understand I can't give direct responses. So the easiest thing I can do is guide you through some of the YouTube videos that I've encountered. They're really good at kind of laying down a foundation of what we would do in office to help these conditions. And if you guys learn something from that, by all means, okay? So they're on the site. Check them out. If you don't like them, let me know how to improve them. Talk to you guys next time.